What is going on there, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting. Today, great rivalries in gun history. That's what we're going to talk about today. From some classic Americana, anything from a sporting shotgun to the most tactical of assault rifles, baby. That's what we're going to get into today on Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, tactics, ammo, ballistics, all manner of things, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Quick lightning strike of a bio here. Blessed by God to be a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. Military, law enforcement, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast. Well, I can think of no more appropriate place to start great rivals in the gun genre in history more than the Winchester 94 and the Marlin Model 336. This one goes way back. It's a long fight. We're talking 94 as in 1894. These are both great lever action carbines. They've been chambered in a lot of things, but probably both most commonly chambered in 30-30, or it was originally known as, I believe 30 Winchester centerfire, WCF. You might see some older guns still marked that way. This is an old rivalry. They're both fantastic. I like actually the handling, the quick shooting of the Winchester Model 94 better. It's a little bit more fast handling of a carbine. For actual modern hunting, like deer hunting, I think the Model 336 by Marlin is a bit better. I don't think they intended it that way, but the closed receiver and the flat top receiver on top just lends itself much better to the mounting of good modern optics. There were some models of the 94 like the angle eject and things, but because the traditional 94 ejects straight out the top, it can make it a little bit awkward to mount an optic on. So if you just want a light, fast handling brush carbine with iron sights, the 94 is fantastic. If you want something to mount modern optics on, or you like the more closed bolt design better, which has some advantages, the Marlin Model 336. And that's what I'm talking about here. They're still in a fight, right? There's no clear winner. They've been scrapping it out like two scrappy junkyard dogs, and they're still going at it. Winchester's still making the 94, and Marlin just came back out after their debacle and buyout from Remington and that whole bankruptcy thing. They're again making the Model 336, so the fight continues. Who will prevail? I don't know. Both are really, really good guns. It really depends on what you want. You could make a clear case either way for one being better than the other. Do you want a, saddle carbine for a horse of quick, fast handling? The Winchester 94. Do you want a, mounting a good modern optic on, let's say, a truck gun or something like that? Then the Marlin 336 pulls ahead. One of the reasons I like some of the Marlin 336s is because they were available at one time in stainless. I don't know, unless there was a special small run, I don't know of any Winchester 94s available in stainless. But the Marlin 336 you could get, I don't think currently, but for a long time in the past, you could get those in stainless, which is awesome to me. Now, let's talk about military handguns. The big rivalry now, I think, the two clear front runners for polymer striker-fired handguns are the Glock and the SIG 320 series. And by that, I mean most of the polymer double stack. I know Glock makes other stuff, but the polymer double stack, that whole family. I'm not talking about like the 43 or the 43X or anything. I'm talking about like the 17, the 19, that kind of fighting handgun genre and the SIG 320 genre, which includes the M17 and M18. Now, I'm no fanboy of Glock. You guys probably know that. I was actually out shooting these two guns. I didn't plan this out, but I was actually shooting those two today when I went out to the range. And let's just say I'm no fan of Glock. However, I think if I was going to choose a handgun for the U.S. military, I probably would have just picked the Glock 17. It was the clear choice. That said, it did lose to the M17 M18, and I think, honestly, it's a better gun. I don't know if it's a better gun for mass issue to troops who have never and probably won't get very much handgun training, but it's a fantastic gun. I think it is better. I shot a Glock 17 versus an M18, and I shot an M17 today as well. But they're better handguns, in my opinion. They're a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more going on, but I think, sadly, Glock lost that fight. Now, Glock is still going strong. Glock is still very, very popular with the diehard, the people that have just drunk the Glock Kool-Aid, and they're going down with the Glock ship. Like, they're going down with that plastic injection molded chip. They're married to it. Anything other than Glock is just wrong. But for other people that are more willing to try other things, not so much. That said, the Glock is kind of the standard that you measure even today. You still measure everything else against the Glock if you're talking about polymer striker-fired handguns. It is the standard. It is very simple. I don't think it's more reliable than some other guns, but I think it is as reliable as any other handgun ever made. There are some, I think, that rival it. Smith & Wesson M&P, I think, is absolutely as reliable, but I don't think anything is more reliable than a Glock 17, Glock 19. They are crazy reliable for a gun that loads itself, semi-automatic 9mm handgun. They're crazy reliable. They're crazy robust. They're crazy stout. And often we might think of something complex as being really genius, but oftentimes, especially when it comes to fighting weapons, genius lies in simplicity. The fact that you can make something with so fewer moving parts that works well. You look at the amount of moving parts on a Glock, it is remarkably simple, especially when you're used to other guns. Look at it compared to a lot of guns in days of yore, like older versions of guns that came out well before the Glock. They're just way more complicated. The Glock's strength, a lot of it lies in its simplicity. It certainly doesn't lie in its ergonomics or its trigger. It relies in its simplicity. And it is simple, it is robust, and it is rugged. That said, it lost to the M17 M18 in trials. M17 M18, I think, has better ergonomics. It has, I don't know of anybody objectively that would say a Glock has a better trigger. The M17 M18 just goes to the bathroom all over a Glock trigger. I shot them side by side today. Factory trigger versus factory trigger. It's not even close. I prefer a hammer-fired single-action, safety-on, like single-action only style handgun. That said, for a polymer, what I would call staple gun, polymer striker-fired kind of trigger, the Glock is like chewing on gravel. It's just horrible. For a polymer striker-fired trigger, the M17 M18, and by that measure the 320, it's not bad. Plus, it's modular. And that, I don't really understand. This is the reason I probably, even though I don't like Glock that much, if I was choosing a handgun for the military, I probably would have picked the Glock. Because I don't think that modularity makes any difference. At least when I was serving in two branches of the military, in infantry and cavalry and things like that, as an enlisted man, I don't see the armorer saying, oh, hey there, I'm just going to make up, Private Smith. Let me measure your hands and see what handgun grip module best fits you. Like, let me see. They're going to say, no, here's your card. Sign for this thing. If you lose it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I don't think they're issuing different grips and different things like that to individual Marines and soldiers. I could be wrong. So I don't really understand the whole modular thing. That said, for the civilian, it's a giant advantage. That's one of the reasons I picked it. I recently, and if this comes out, my apologies if it comes out before my announcement of the quest for a compact carry gun, but I chose this thing M18. One of my go-to carry guns in general is a full-size M17 with a Trijicon RMR. I like that gun. I didn't want to like it, to be honest. I kind of was rooting against it when I got it. I got a used one for a song and a dance, a really good price. And I was like, I'm going to try the military's new handgun. I'm going to run the crap out of it. I'm probably not going to like it because it's plastic and it's got a striker. But I'll be honest, it's a good gun. It's a good gun. Got the Trijicon RMR on it. It's been rock solid. It's been reliable. It's been everywhere from the deserts of Arizona to the rainforests of Alaska. It's a rock solid gun. And when I was getting this is where it gets back to the modular thing, I decided if I'm getting a compact gun, why not get the M18? It's got much of the things I like about the M17. It's smaller. If I want it even smaller as far as the grip goes, I'll just take a Dremel to it or a hand file or a saw, literally, and cut it. Grip modules, I just bought one for $35 plus shipping. Right? If I ruin it, I'm not out a ton of money. The Glock is nowhere near that flexible. So for the individual user, that modularity makes a lot of sense. So that modularity for you, for the end user, if you're like just getting into concealed carry, I don't advise you get one of the Micro 9s. I just don't. I think there are two kinds of people that get the Micro 9s, and sadly the majority is the one that probably shouldn't have it. The guy that's really good with a fighting handgun and decides, you know what, I'm good, really good with a full-size fighting handgun. I can get by with a little bit smaller gun. Okay. But for the guy that just wants a gun to carry because it's easy to carry, if he's not good with a full-size handgun, he's probably going to be pretty ineffective with a Micro 9, in my opinion. And that's the majority of people that are carrying it. I think you'd be better served with something like a 320 chassis system where you can kind of change it, especially when you're new to concealed carry, because you're not going to know what works for you yet. You're not going to know. Like, I generally carry strong side 3 o'clock OWB. You may decide you might not like that. You may decide that you want to carry slightly further back behind the hip. You may decide you want to carry appendix. I would advise against it, but hey, if you want to do it, it's America. That being said, you can swap out grip modules. You can decide, you know what, this grip texture is rubbing me a little bit raw. I want a little bit less aggressive grip texture. I'm going to go to a Wilson Combat grip module. You get the idea. You're like, this is a little bit too long. I'm going to cut it down and put a compact magazine in it. You can do that. Yeah, it's very modular. So I think the Glock 19 will continue to be strong, and there will still be people in the Glock camp that have just drunk the Glock Kool-Aid because Glock is kind of a genius when it comes to marketing. They will still continue to give big organizations like law enforcement just want like the fire extinguisher gun on their hip just to make it go bang if they need it. I've said before, most cops are not gunfighters, despite what you may think. They are administrators that carry a gun. You just need something to check that box affordably. Glock will give them a giant discount on mass purchases, and and this is the genius marketing. I think if they realize if a cop carries it, people will think it must be a decent gun. So I think Glock will continue to be a giant portion of the market. However, I think the way of the future is the 320 M17, M18 for now. Perhaps that will be replaced by something else, but I don't think it's going to be the Echelon. But maybe something else will come in the future. But for right now, that's a big rivalry. Glock is still a much larger portion of the market, but usually in historic times when the military adopts a platform, it does pretty well on the civilian side. So it's been a few years. They haven't spewed it out of their mouth as far as the M17, M18 goes. I see it continuing to gain ground. There's a lot of hashtag #MeToo polymer striker-fired handguns. Look at me, I've got this feature. But as far as actual big chunks of the market, I think it's, for the foreseeable future, going to come down to Glock and the SIG variants. Now, let's talk about one of the great sporting bolt-action rifle rivalries in American history. In one corner, Big Red Winchester with the Winchester Model 70. And in the other corner, Big Green Remington with the Remington Model 700. These are the 20th century American sporting rifles, which trickled out into much of the rest of the world as far as fantastic bolt-action rifles. This is just a hardcore rivalry. And if you don't know the pre-64 Winchester Model 70, legendary. It's called the Rifleman's Rifle. It was made originally, the Pre-64 action, controlled round feed, buttery smooth, rock solid, reliable. And Remington came out with their design, the Remington. There's backstory to this, right? There was models before the Model 70. There was models before the Remington 700, but let's not get too crazy. Go, watch Forgotten Weapons or something if you want to get way back into the weeds. You could trace the lineage of the Model 70 all the way back to the Mauser 98, or probably some prototypes before the Mauser 98. But let's start when the Winchester Model 70 Pre-64 was a really established action, controlled round feed, loosely based on a 1903, which is loosely based on a Mauser, but really proven, really rock solid, and really well made. They took this proven controlled round feed Mauser type action and made it buttery smooth and rock solid, reliable, and legendary, and they made it really well. And Remington comes along and says, I want to make a bolt action rifle that's really good, cheaper. They use like a tubular receiver. They did I don't see them advertising anymore, but they advertised at the time 3 rings of steel. It's supposed to be super strong and super accurate. It was a push feed. That's one of the big differences. And push feeds are generally simpler manufacture, hence they undercut Winchester by quite a bit. And they tend to be a little bit more accurate because they're simpler. That goes both ways. Also aids in accuracy, also aids in cheap production. Look at most of the the economy rifles of today. They're push feeds. Ruger American, Tikka T3s, they're push feeds. They're cheap, they're affordable, they're very accurate. And they started to eat into the sales, as I understand, of the Winchester Model 70. And Winchester, in their wisdom, said, well, we're just going to call it the Model 70 and make it way cheaper. So they turned it into a push feed, which I don't know how they even call it a Model 70 because it's really a Model 70 in name only. It's so much different than the Pre-64 controlled round feed. It was basically just a push feed. And they struggled with that thing for decades until they went back to the controlled round feed. If we talk about, and that hurt them, I think, for a lot of decades, because for a lot of people in America that were hunting, they wanted it for hunting whitetail. And does it really matter, controlled round feed versus push feed? If you're hunting whitetail on the back 40 and you get a malfunction, you just go home that day, go to deer camp, whatever, not a big deal. But for people, dangerous game hunters, hardcore hunters, stuff like that, they really like the controlled round feed. And a brief aside, for a long time it wasn't being made, which is when Ruger decided to come out, I think, with his M77. But let's table that for now. I think that hurt them for a lot of decades, and that allowed Remington to come in strong with their Remington Model 700. Still today, for a lot of really high-end custom rifles, they base their actions on a Remington 700 because they're simple and they can be made very accurate. If you want a crazy accurate rifle, not always, but there's a good chance if you're getting into a semi-custom rifle, a custom build, they're going to use some form of Remington 700 action. It's a simple, fairly symmetrical machine that can be made pretty accurate, and that's kind of its strength. Used a lot, in like the Vietnam era, both the Model 70 and the Remington 700 were used, but for the latter half of the 20th century, the Remington 700 kind of took over. You've seen a lot in the military, the M24 sniper rifle. A lot of military, police, designated marksman type roles were using it. It's a good rifle too. Now, the big debate is, what are you going to use it for? If you want, there's almost very little debate in the dangerous game, hardcore hunting. The State Rifle of Alaska is the Winchester Model 70. If you're doing dangerous game hunting in Africa, you probably want the Winchester Model 70. If you want rock solid controlled round feed, quiet chambering of a round, less likely to get a round stuck in the chamber with a broken extractor, all that stuff, like pure reliability, the Pre-64 Winchester Model 70 and now the new ones, which are also controlled round feed, they're just beautiful rifles. If you want a accurate rifle, one that can be made and copied well with more commonality of parts and and accuracy is your number one thing, then the Remington 700 is probably your baby. You're probably on that side of the fence. But both these rifles, it just kind of depends on what you want. They're both good rifles. And that's why the big rivalry. Now, what hurt? The Winchester was hurt for quite a while by going to the push feed and their quality control, in my opinion, kind of going down. And then Remington, a few decades later, really went down the hole too with the whole bankruptcy thing. They're just now coming back out with the Remington 700. When they came out with the 870, I was excited I got one. That thing was junk. It didn't run, which kind of ticked me off. I don't really have any plans to buy a new 700 because of that. But maybe their new 700s are okay. Maybe they work. Maybe they're decently accurate. The only problem is now there's so many really good other accurate rifles being made. I don't know if they can keep up. But this was the big duel in the bolt-action hunting rifle world in the latter half of the 20th century. The Winchester Model 70 or the Remington 700. And again, what do you want? Do you want accuracy? Do you want the ability to tune in action better? Or do you want rock-solid reliability? It just kind of depends on which side of that fence you're on. But both are good rifles. Both are kind of legendary rifles. How about, let's go to 22s. I'm kind of trying to switch around here to different things. That way, I'm not just talking about a whole bunch of hunting stuff or a whole bunch of tactical stuff or plinking stuff. I'm trying to mix it up. That way, everybody gets a little bit. So you just like all kinds of guns, in which case you'll probably like the whole episode. But the big rivalry in 22 rifles for a long time, for decades and decades, was the Ruger 1022 and the Marlin Model 60. Both are fantastic. You could make a case for either one. If you just want like a handy homestead small game rifle just for purely hunting, the Marlin Model 60 is really good. That micro groove rifling, really accurate. It is a tubular magazine underneath, though, not a detachable box magazine. The Ruger came in strong. It's got a detachable box magazine. The classic magazine is a flush fit 10-round rotary magazine, meaning it kind of spins inside the actual magazine. It's square, but inside there's like a round toothed cylinder that feeds each round in through the top. One of the things that makes that rifle great is the great rugged reliable magazines. In fact, I much prefer just the factory 10s to any of the aftermarket high-capacity stuff. That said, if you want that, that's a big advantage of the Ruger 1022. It's way more modular. You can put all kinds of magazines in it, all kinds of different sights on it, all kinds of different stocks. There are some things you can do to the Marlin Model 60, but it's much less modular. And I think it's clear to say, especially since the Marlin Model 60 is no longer being made and hasn't been made for a while, and they didn't come back out with it. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But I think it's clear that the 1022 won that duel. Like, 1022 is the Aaron Burr to the Marlin Model 60's Alexander Hamilton. The Ruger 1022 won that battle. And I think it's the better one. I'm looking at one right now that I bought when I was a very young man. I don't remember if it was the first gun I bought with my own money or the second. I don't remember. I bought a shotgun around the same time, which I no longer have. But I'm looking at that Ruger 1022. I still practice with it quite often. It's hanging up. I don't know how many stocks it's been through. I don't know how many sights it's been through. I don't know how many triggers it's been through. It's been through a lot, but it's still going. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal rifle. And I think it's the clear winner. Again, if you just want like a handy small game carbine on the homestead, you don't have to worry about magazines. You know, you're not really going to mount an optic on it. You can mount some of the older school optics on a Marlin Model 60, but the 1022's got a much better optics mounting system for modern optics. So it's a clear winner. If you just want a small game hunting tool for homestead and you get one for a good deal or it's just a family heirloom, the Marlin Model 60 is still a good 22 caliber rifle, but I don't think it's as good as the Ruger 1022. That one won that one for a lot of reasons. A big one today is the ability to mount optics, the detachable box magazines, the just crazy amount of aftermarket support for it. It's a great rifle. So it clearly won that. But for a long time, that was a big duel. In fact, growing up, my childhood friend, who I still love dearly, he had a Marlin Model 60, and I had a Ruger 1022. And we'd go out and we'd hunt small game and do a lot of things we probably weren't supposed to. But we had a lot of fun. And that was kind of a big rivalry. He still has that rifle. I still have mine. They're both phenomenal 22 rifles. And they were kind of the latter half of the 20th century's 22 rifles. How about police revolvers of the 20th century? We think of semi-autos with police today, but it wasn't that long ago when police carried wheel guns. When I joined LAPD, there were still cops, and I'm not that old, guys. There were still cops that carried wheel guns. I don't mean as a backup gun. I carried a wheel gun as a backup gun. I mean carried a wheel gun as their primary go-to fighting handgun. And they were still around then. We're talking after the war in Iraq, after I did my time in the Marine Corps and went to work for LAPD. They were still around. So it's fairly modern phenomenon of American, mostly the majority of peace officers going from revolvers to semi-autos. That's not as old a transition as you might think. For a big chunk of the 20th century, there was a big rivalry between Colt and Smith & Wesson. I'm going to pick a couple of, well, let's just say the Colt Python versus the Smith & Wesson K and L frames, because those are real common in police duty use. If it's a pure beauty contest, the Colt Python gets it. The Colt Python is one of the most beautiful, I'm not even guns. I think the Colt Python is just one of the most beautiful machines ever made. It's gorgeous. Kind of like a Model 57 Chevy or, an old Indian motorcycle. It's just one of those beautiful machines. If we're just talking straight beauty contest, if this was Miss America Wheel Gun Edition, the Colt wins. The Colt is a beautiful, beautiful gun. Yeah, the Colt Python, again, is one of the most beautiful machines I think ever made. But Smith & Wesson, if we're going from a performance standpoint, I think it kind of wins. Just the way that the internals work, the robustness of the system. They may look similar on the outside. You might think, they're both 6-shot 357 Magnums. Some of the early K-frames with the forcing cones being trimmed too far did have some issues. Why the L-frame exists, I think. But although they're both 6-shot 357 Magnums, you take them apart and look internally, they're very different machines inside. The end user may think, it's a double single action revolver, 6-shot 357 Magnum, but when you open them up, they work very differently. And I think as far as ability to work on them, ability to make them run accurately and smooth and longevity, probably for a fighting handgun, I know this is going to anger some people, but I think for a fighting handgun, the Smith & Wesson's probably better. If you're going to keep on it and keep on the maintenance and the parts wearing out and stuff like that, and you want the most beautiful gun and a really good smooth trigger, even just out of the box, the Colt Python is, again, it's a beautiful gun. They're both really good. So it depends on what you want. Now, let's talk about the 12-gauge pump shotgun duel of the century. Let's talk about the Remington 870 and the Mossberg 500. And by 500, I mean the whole 500 series. I mean the 500, the 590, the 598-1, etc. Let's talk about that whole genre versus the 870. And there's a lot of different models of 870. They just called them the 870, but there's the 870 Wingmaster, the 870 Express, the Police Magnum, the Marine Magnum. I'm throwing them all in there too. But the operating systems. Let me start by saying an older 870 Wingmaster or Police Magnum is perhaps the finest pump shotgun ever made. The problem is they have to be made well, with really good quality control. And Remington's quality control, even before they went bankrupt, I think started slipping on some of their guns and giving you issues. The Mossbergs, I don't think have ever really suffered. I'm sure there's always a lemon, right? You make tens of thousands of guns of anything, you're going to have a couple out of spec. But as far as mass quality control issues, Mossbergs, I don't think I've ever really suffered from that. So here's the thing. If I pick up a Mossberg 500, I think this gun's going to run. If I pick up an 870, I'm going to think, when was this gun made? Because that's going to tell me if it's going to run or not. But again, if you can get, I've run them side by side, not actually side by side. I couldn't shoot them both at the same time, but you get I've shot one and then shot the other. A good 870, to me, just shoots better. It fits better, it points better. My natural point of aim is better with an 870. That said, my go-to apocalypse shotgun is a Mossberg 590S because it's reliable, it's rugged, and because it didn't suffer from quality control and bankruptcies, it's kind of stayed up with more of the modern things. The Mossberg 590S is the only Mossberg is the only shotgun I'm aware of that on purpose will let you run the short shells, which is a big deal to me. The shorty shells, right? I can put 13 rounds, that 590S. I can go from a 3-inch Magnum to a standard 2 3/4 to a short shell and then back again. And it will run them all reliably. And again, the Remington has come back out with the 870. I have not been impressed with their quality since they've come back out. I cannot in good conscience recommend them. If you can find, and you're only going to run, 2 3/4 or 3-inch shells, depending on when it was made. Some of the older, even Wingmasters, may only run 2 3/4. But if you just want to run standard shells and you can find an old, well-built Wingmaster or Police Magnum, I think they're perhaps some of the best shotguns ever made, period. As far as pump shotguns go. Probably not going to compare with a beautiful, English double, but we're talking apples and oranges. For a pump shotgun, they are some of the best ever made. You're talking about just any year manufacturer, bunch of new models. You want to mount an optic, you want to mount a dot, you want it to be reliable, you want it to eat short shells, or you want to put a bayonet on it. A lot more options. The 500, 590 series is the clear winner. It is still going strong. And again, no quality control issues. I'm not going to pick one up and be like, I should say the new 870s that have come out, they used to be the Express and the Wingmaster. They've come out with the Fieldmaster, which I guess is supposed to be some kind of go-between or something. I don't know. But the Fieldmaster is what they call it now. Maybe they'll come out with different models in the future. Or maybe they already do. But if you see a new Fieldmaster. But if I pick up a 500, a 590, I assume it's just going to work unless I can see something visibly broken. If I pick up a 870 Express or Fieldmaster, I'm like, I don't know. It's a lot of work. You can get them to run, but do you really want to buy a brand new shotgun and put a bunch of work into it? That really depends on you. So I think the 500, 590 is the better, wiser choice unless you can find a really old, solid, reliable 870. I should say the 870 fits me better, it shoots better, but from a pure engineering reliability standpoint, the 500, 590 it's a better design as far as rugged reliability goes. It has 2 extractors. Redundancy is good, especially if you're talking about like a survival gun, a hard times use tool. Having 2 extractors, some redundancy there is nice. The fact that I can change out an ejector with a flathead screwdriver as opposed to needing to weld it, which is what I think you'd have to do with the 870, again, there's something to that. So for a rugged, reliable design, I think as far as the internal workings of the gun and how it works, also with the shell lifter going out of the way when you go to load it, I think the Mossberg's a better design. I just think the 870 fits me personally better. That may be a broad spectrum thing. It may just be me. That said, my go-to apocalypse shotgun again is a Mossberg 590S. So, yeah, I think the Mossberg won that one. And it did it mostly because of quality control. Let us talk about perhaps the greatest gun rivalry of the 20th century, not just affecting us and sportsmen and hunters or concealed carry, but warfare in the 20th and 21st century. Maybe the greatest rivalry in gun history, right? The AR-15 and variants, right? M16, M4 versus the AK-47 and its variants. The AK-47, the 74, right? The Dragunov, all those things. And I've done whole episodes on just these 2 guns, so I'm not going to get extensive and exhaustive on this list, but they are the preeminent assault rifles of the 20th and going into the 21st century. We're supposed to be replacing the M4 and the M16 Ar-15 family with the M5, now M7. Whether that goes through or not, I'm not convinced. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But if you look at it, would you still consider that an AR-15 variant? It sure operates, as far as the end user goes, like one. The internals are far different, so maybe you wouldn't consider it. But either way, it hasn't replaced it en masse yet. We're still dealing with the AR-15 variants, M4s, M16A1, A2, M16 A4s, M4s, and we're still dealing on battlefields all over the world. I mean, look at Ukraine, look at, Israel. We're still dealing Africa, all over the place with AK-47s. They are the assault rifles of the latter part of the 20th century and going into the 21st century. I mean, we're more than 20 years into the 21st century, and they're still the two dominant assault rifles. Weapons of war for mainline troops by a wide margin. So, what are the strengths? There are different philosophies here. So, the AK-47 was built to be for mostly conscript soldiers, right? To equip massive amounts of troops. And you see this because it's used effectively by people all over the world that speak different languages, different ages, minimum requirements for training, for maintenance, for upkeep. It's a rugged, simple, reliable, self-loading rifle. The Ar-15 was meant to be a lightweight, high-capacity assault rifle, high velocity, not super powerful, but high velocity, high round count rifle for a professional standing army, which is what we have. It requires more maintenance. It just does. I'm not saying it's not reliable, but I'm saying it does require more maintenance. It requires more upkeep. It was designed, if you look at both systems, for a professional fighter. Like, look at all the different ways you have to fix a malfunction. If you take a professional fighting carbine class, and it's a good one, I think they will teach you all kinds of ways to clear malfunctions on AR-15s. You got your failure to fire, you've got your double feed, you've got your bolt overrides, you've got all kinds of stuff. AK-47 is basically run the charging handle. If that doesn't work, you take a mag out and run the charging handle again. If something's stuck, maybe you bang it on the ground and mortar it. It's a simple machine. The AR-15, again, different philosophies. It was designed for a professional, standing, trained army. There are AKs, bouncing around Africa that are so crazy in disrepair, but yet they still work. Probably have the same extractor, all the stuff from when they rolled off the assembly line in some communist country, and they're still going. AR-15s require upkeep, changing of extractors, if you shoot them a lot, if you train with them a lot, and if you drag them through all kinds of nasty, sandy, dusty, dirty environments. Different philosophies. Both are good rifles. And I don't think this was planned this way, it just worked out. It's a lot easier to have a good optics mounting solution for an AR-15 pattern rifle than an AK-47. So that's a big advantage. Optics are a force multiplier. We haven't seen giant advancements in firearms in the past 50 years. We've seen little tweaks here or there, minor improvements, a little bit better powders, better velocity, better case materials, things like that, tweaking certain things, better ergonomics. But as far as force multiplying goes, a lot of that has been in optics. And the AR-15 lends itself better to mounting optics, just by the way the receiver was designed. And I don't think that was on purpose. I think it just worked out that way. So that is a major advantage for the AR-15. And obviously I'm not going to pronounce a winner here. Both are good. What do you want to do? Do you just want a gun? Do you just want a fighting rifle and you consider yourself more of a conscript, like you're going to pick up the rifle if you have to, but you're not really going to do a lot of training with it? You just want a decent rifle, gonna work, gonna go bang probably, repeatable firepower. Or do you want, a fast handling, lighter weight, better ergonomics, but requires more upkeep, more maintenance, can mount modern optics on it? Which one of those appeals to you more? Obviously, the sad history of warfare in the past, 50 years, 70 years has taught us that both are effective. So there's that. They're both effective. It just kind of depends on what philosophy you adhere to there. Also, they're both intermediate cartridges, but they're far, far different, right? A 223 round is so much different than a 7.62x39 round. They're both intermediate cartridges, and I'm not here to tell you one's better than the other, but they're way different. They're just different attributes, different philosophies. You're talking about a 30 caliber, generally 122, 123, 120 something grain bullet at moderate velocities, mid 2000s, versus the AR-15. You're talking about a 22 caliber, 55 grain to 62 grain. I know you can get some heavier, but common 55 to 62 grain, going at well over 3,000 feet a second in a full 20-inch rifle barrel. It's different philosophies. And again, which one of those do you want? It really depends on what you're doing. Both obviously are effective. So there's no clear winner there. We call that one a draw. And on that philosophy part, although they weren't really military philosophers that I'm aware of, we go back to the hunting side. The last rivalry we're going to talk about is not at all about two different guns. It's more about two different personalities in the gun world in the 20th century. And that was Jack O'Connor and Elmer Keith. And although you may not recognize those names if you're in kind of gun culture 2.0, the Glock 19 and the Ar-15 type world, they may have influenced a lot more than you may realize. Right. Jack O'Connor and Elmer Keith were two big personalities in firearms world, which you may want to research if you're not familiar with them. But they had kind of different philosophies. I don't know how much of that was organic and how much of that was drummed up and kind of encouraged, because you got to remember, back before the internet, and again, the internet is really, really modern. You don't have to go back that far to go pre-internet. Guns and all this advertising and stuff that now that you see pushed on you and vomited out all over you on most gun channels and gun things. Buy this, you'll be cool. Buy this, you'll be a gunfighter. Wear this, new Gucci black multicam and you'll be an operator. That's not new. They were doing that in the gun magazine days too. But anyway, the kind of this big rivalry that, again, I don't know how much of it was organic and how much of it was to push sales of different things, but Elmer Keith was a kind of a big horsepower, heavy bullet, heavy for caliber, 338 OKH, I think was the name of the round, like 35 Whelen, big heavy bullets. That's what you want to kill stuff. And Jack O'Connor was more of the surgical, higher velocity. He's really thought of as the champion of the 270. He really hunted all over with the 270, and I don't think it's fair that he mostly gets remembered for the 270. I think he liked a lot of other calibers, but the 270 is kind of not that, right? It's even lighter than what was one of the standards of 30-06. Lighter bullets, faster, accurate, longer, flatter trajectory, or do you want a big, heavy bullet? And these were kind of the two big schools of thought. And again, both are effective. A 35 Whelen will kill an elk, and a 270 has killed a lot of elk. Both are effective. What are you trying to do? What is your philosophy of hunting elk? But Elmer Keith and Jack O'Connor, if you're not familiar, you may want to look into those if you're intrigued by gun culture, because if you want to understand where we are, it's important to understand how we got here. So it's kind of important to reflect on those things and what we got from them. And those personalities, they weren't the only two, but that was a big rivalry, in the gun magazine days, Jack O'Connor and Elmer Keith. So with that, that's the last one we're going to talk about today. If you enjoyed this content and you thought you got anything out of it, you learned something, you learned about gun history, something like that, and you think that's worth contributing to, because I'm not trying to push you on the next camo pattern. You got to be on Team Mossy Oak or Team Realtree if you want to be cool. That's not me. You can buy any one of those guns. I don't care. I refuse sponsors, unlike the vast majority of other channels, because I don't want to be a sellout. I don't want to be biased. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. I don't want to tell you to buy some cheap polyester made in China thing with some new Gucci pattern and tell you it's going to make you a better hunter, when you need to learn how to be still and be quiet and be patient. That's what's going to make you a better hunter, being still and quiet and patient, much more than whatever camo pattern you are. And if you appreciate that honesty and that content, the way you get it is, one, by the grace of God. He gives me the talent and ability and time and grace to be able to do this. But the patrons do a lot. If you want to be an active contributor, consider becoming a patron. Mostly because you want to support the show, but also patrons get a lot of cool insider-only content. I did one today on reading animal sign that I will post just for patrons. If you're not a patron, unless you're a really good hacker, you're just not going to get it. It's for the patrons only. If you want stuff like that and a lot of other stuff, We're doing a side poll right now on Patreon about what percentage of the U.S. population do you think will die off if there's a massive grid disruption for a year or more? Like if the grid goes down, meaning no trucking, no food, no oil, no, modern agriculture, if that all goes away, what percentage of the population do you think will make it? That's just a little side poll. That's just one thing going on today. And again, I recorded an episode today on reading animal sign and critical thinking as it applies to hunting. Anyway, if you want that and you want to support the show, consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. With that, your tactical tip of the day. If you live in an urban, suburban environment, which many do, sadly, today, I shouldn't say sadly, some people love it. You got the yuppies, and I'm not putting down yuppies. Young urban professionals, if that's you, rock on. If you want your $5 coffee and whatever's in right now, I'm not going to endorse skinny jeans, but you do you. But a lot of people live in that suburban environment. I refer to this as Gucci flage, but don't think that camo pattern has to be necessarily camo, like, bottomland or, M80 whatever woodland. It doesn't. You can blend into your environment. I was out today in a plaid flannel shirt. And, camo is what you make it. I guess, Indo-European hunting woolly mammoths in animal skin is camouflage, right? But so I guess that's not true. But a traditional camouflage before there was all these new patterns was plaid flannel. So another thing we've been talking about on Patreon, the Gucci flage patterns. Some things you might consider, especially for like a concealment garment, a Hawaiian shirt. And not a Hawaiian shirt like a lot of them that look like a clown vomited Fruity Pebbles on your shirt. I'm talking about just subdued colors. Like, it could be a floral pattern, it could be paisleys that are like beige and tan or green and khaki, like swirled shirts. Just all camo really does is break up your pattern. And you can do that with something that doesn't scream tactical. Right? If you're trying to conceal carry, probably you don't want a black multicam shirt, even if it covers your gun, because it looks tactical. But a, beige and cream-colored paisley shirt does not scream tactical, but it still breaks up your outline. It's still good for that. If you're, again, quiet and patient and know how to move in the woods, you're probably going to blend in more than the guy with the best camouflage that doesn't know how to be still. So don't think of camouflage as strictly it has to be a, whatever specific, like I'm hunting this, I need this camouflage pattern, or this company that's making stuff in China but is all over American advertisers and it's got this cool looking pattern, I gotta have that to blend in. You don't. Think about tones and natural neutral colors. Your olive drabs, your tans, your khakis, your creams, your grays, your moss colors, anything like that, right? Different. I don't like black. I think black blends in with almost nothing natural unless you're like in an obsidian field or a shale pit or something. But I don't like black. But other than that, many other colors blend in really well. And that break up your outline, like irregular patterns, right? You might think plaid flannel because it's straight lines, but when you're wearing it, those lines bend. So it's not straight lines unless you're just built like a fridge. So think about that. Think about what camo actually does and what you can wear to do the same thing that doesn't scream tactical operator if that's not what you're going for. If you're, going to a tactical shooting school, then it doesn't really matter. Wear your really good cry precision multicam pants with knee pads. But if you're going to Target to get dog food, maybe not the outfit for you. That's your tactical tip of the day. Thinking about camouflage critically in a different way, a practical way. Practiflage. Your tactical verse of the day. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Boy, do we need that in our today's culture, right? Be anxious for nothing. Be anxious for nothing. So much worry in culture and society today. If there's nothing you can do about it, then worrying doesn't help you. And if there's something you can do, then do it and stop worrying about it. But worry can be a disease. Anxiety. Look at how many people are on anxiety drugs, being literally drugged for anxiety. Be anxious for nothing. Is God with you? Are you a servant of God? Are you walking with God? Will God not take care of you? That's faith, right? God will take care of you. He will take care of you. From the terror by night or the arrow that flies by day, God will protect you. Believe that. Stop being so anxious. I didn't say that was easy, but it is simple. The things of God are often simple and powerful and beautiful. Be anxious for nothing. Thanks, and have a blessed day.